Hi, welcome to today's training on the PPC research phase. We'll be covering things like knowing your objectives and goals, as well as the keyword landscape and tools that we use to do competitive research as well as keyword research. So first, we'll discuss knowing your objective and goals. And one of the main ways we surface goals when we start with a new client is by scheduling an onboarding call. During the onboarding call, we discuss things like goals, so whether that's driving conversions, driving traffic. In a lot of cases, new clients have like a target cost per acquisition goal that they want to hit. So during the onboarding call, we discuss all sorts of factors like that. We talk about potentially average order values if the new client is an e-com website. Also things like the lifetime value of a customer or a client. So for example, for an education client, that would be most likely the value of a student. And then we also talk about other main factors like seasonality. It's important to know when we expect the business to be the strongest and what times of the year where maybe we expect to see fewer leads. And then additionally, it's important to figure out who their main competitors are. This is especially helpful in the research phase because it'll help us distinguish any sort of differentiators that the client might have as compared to their competitors, things that really set them apart from the competition. And then it's also important to get an idea of what sort of budget they want to aim for with their PPC efforts. All of these questions and even more are really important in getting off on the right foot with a new client and are also super beneficial when starting the research phase, so you can really hit the ground running. So during the onboarding call, it's super important to surface key goals. And the way we kind of do that is actually by interviewing the client in a sense and getting an idea of just hearing from them what their main goals are and what sort of expectations there are around handling the account. Lots of times we'll start the onboarding call by just asking them for a bit of background on their business, but then we'll go into even more specific questions throughout the onboarding agenda. And of course, one of the main ones there being what's the budget, because we want to know exactly what the budget is, because that'll affect kind of how we end up structuring the account and a lot of other different factors when setting up a new account. It's also important to ask what sort of technical logistics there are. So for example, what websites will the account encompass? In a lot of cases, some clients have like a subdomain where they send some of their paid traffic. So it's important to get an idea of what sites will actually be included. Were their previous PPC accounts utilized? Lots of times we can use learnings from those previous accounts when we're setting up a new account. So it's important to find out all of that, as well as any sort of what sort of development resources they have on their team for setting up things like tracking or even building out different PPC landing pages as well. Oftentimes the client also has a pretty good idea of what their top keywords are, or at the very least, which keywords they would ideally like to show an ad for. So it's important to surface some of those top keywords as well, and that can really be beneficial when actually doing some of the keyword research. It's a great kind of launching point when we have an idea of what their top keywords are. And then previously mentioned, another main question is, who are your competitors? Again, doing competitive research helps us figure out what sort of messaging we should use, but then also what sort of unique value propositions we can use or differentiators that set our client apart from the competition. So those are all very important questions to ask. But when thinking about different goals, we want to consider a handful of things here. Oftentimes, it comes down to these four things: traffic, metrics, oftentimes a conversion goal, or return on investment. So for traffic, this one tends to be the most simple. Basically, the goal is to just drive traffic to the website with the given budget. So oftentimes here the goal will be, of course, like something like clicks, but then also you can focus on things like cost per click or click-through rate, and reducing cost per click or increasing click-through rate as part of your goal. But generally speaking, driving traffic to a landing page tends to be one of the easier goals or the most simple goals. But most of the time, goals are focused around like a conversion sort of goal, or usually around cost per conversion or cost per acquisition. So we see a lot of clients that want to hit a specific cost per conversion, and usually they have some sort of idea what that looks like. So it's important to surface that goal if they have it. In other cases, sometimes, especially if the client is maybe new to paid advertising, they might ask us to work on a goal for them, which again oftentimes comes down to cost per conversion. We can sort of help drive that conversation, and with any sort of learnings we have from initial performance, what sort of cost per conversion would maybe be a good goal for them. Additionally, we'll also see a conversion volume goal. So the advertiser wants to achieve X number of conversions in a given time frame. So for example, in a given month, they want 1,000 leads, whatever it might be. It might be, orders. They want 100 orders per month. Again, we see this vary quite a bit by client and by industry, but lots of times clients do have some sort of conversion volume goal in mind as well. Additionally, we see return on investment. This is easiest to track for e-commerce clients. You'll oftentimes hear us talk about return on ad spend, or ROAS, which is just for every $1 the advertiser spends on paid search, they expect X dollars in return. So a ROAS of 4, which is a pretty common goal for like an e-commerce client. All that means is that for every dollar we spend on PPC, we expect to drive $4 in revenue. So oftentimes with e-com, we see return on investment, or ROAS goal, although this can also come into play with B2B or like education clients, for example, who are able to track revenue through their back end. So oftentimes you see the return on investment goal for e-com, but it is also common for B2B or like education as well. And again, once we've determined these goals, and lots of times these, again, goals are discussed during the onboarding call, these goals will really set us up for success and will give us a better idea of how to structure the account and what sort of keywords we potentially want to go after. So super important that we determine these goals from the get-go. So next we'll move into keyword landscape, and it's really important to understand the keyword landscape for a given client, just because, of course, within a search account, the targeting is primarily based on the keywords that people are searching on Google. So it's really important that we're targeting the right keywords to reach the right audience. And so we'll want to do some basic research just to get a better understanding of the keyword landscape in which you'll be competing in. And the goal is not necessarily to learn everything, but just to get a good sense of what the competitive landscape looks like, and potentially what sort of keywords we should be going after. So within this, you'll want to kind of ask yourself certain questions like, what are the core terms and modifiers in this keyword landscape? What are the most frequently searched terms versus like what sort of adjectives do people use with those terms? An example is like for a coding school, we'd want to include several different variations of learn to code, coding class, coding course, coding bootcamp, learn HTML. You can break out the different languages that they potentially offer. So obviously there's a ton of different keywords that can be targeted, and so it's important to do that research to make sure that we have the proper coverage on those different variants. Additionally, with understanding the keyword landscape, again, it's important to understand who are the biggest competitors, what sort of trends are occurring with the different messaging that those competitors choose to use, and what sort of messaging should we use. What sort of landing pages are the competitors using as well? What does our landing page look like? How can we make ours better? And then also just getting an idea of kind of what the cost per clicks are as well across like Google and Bing, just so we have a much better idea of what sort of budget potentially we need in order to run a successful campaign for the given keywords that we want to target. So here we'll do a little exercise, and again we'll use the example of a coding school in Chicago. And in this instance, the keywords that they initially gave us during the onboarding were learn to code, become a programmer, and coding classes. And one of the best ways to do some very quick and kind of dirty keyword research is just by going into Google and typing in those keywords and seeing what comes up. You'll get an idea of what the SERP looks like when you punch in those keywords. You'll be able to see the different competitors that show up, and then also Google does give you some related searches or like suggestions, and those are all super helpful when trying to figure out what sort of other variations can be targeted. And so you'll see in this next slide here, for the keyword learn to code, there are several different competitors that pop up. We can also, so right off the bat, get an idea of what different competitors are competing in this space, and then also what sort of value props are they using within their ad copy. It's important to look at all of the ad copy, get an idea of what their messaging is, how we can maybe add more value to users through our messaging, and how we can differentiate ourselves from the rest of the competitors. And then like I mentioned, we'd want to plug in all of the different keywords that the client gave to us, get an idea of what the other competitors are, and then additionally checking that autofill. And if you do scroll all the way down to the bottom of the search engine results page, that's where Google usually has the related searches as well, which can be super helpful in determining what sort of variations we might want to include as keywords. Next, we'll take a look at the tools that we use during the PPC research phase. There are several different tools we can use to better understand the keyword landscape. The main two that we call out here are SEMRush and Google Ads Keyword Planner. SEMRush is great in discovering other related keywords, as well as things like CPCs and general competition. So here we can type in core keywords and then go to the phrase match keyword report and look at all of the different related keywords or keywords that contain that core keyword that we've typed in. And again, this also does offer some general CPC data and competition data as well to get an idea of how competitive those keywords will be. And then the tool that I typically use is Google Ads Keyword Planner, which is right in the Google Ads interface. If you go to the Tools menu in any account, you'll see it in there. And this has a similar feature where you can type in a keyword to get an idea of related keywords. So again, good at finding different variants that you might not otherwise think of. But then it also does have historical metrics that you can look at. So this is really great for figuring out what sort of seasonality there might be, what sort of search volume to expect for each keyword per month. And it also does have CPC data as well as a competition index. So again, you can get a ton of great information from Google Ads Keyword Planner. You can also do some forecasting. Lots of times the client will ask for a budget. Hey, we want to target this set of keywords. What sort of budget should we allocate towards that? And within Google Keyword Planner, what we can do is we can plug those keywords in, plug in the exact location that they want to use. So let's say they're just targeting the state of Illinois, we can set that. And then it'll give us some forecasts based on those keywords that we plugged in. The one thing to keep in mind here is that oftentimes the projections are based on roughly 50% impression share. So depending on what sort of impression share your client wants to hit, it's important to factor that in when you're taking a look at some of those Google Keyword Planner forecasts. And the goal with some of this keyword research is just to gather resources to begin your structure document, which is what we'll dive into a little bit later here. But diving a little bit more into SEMRush, so we mentioned the phrase match report. This just provides the search volume and CPC of a certain phrase, and then it shows you related keywords with that phrase in it. So for example, if we typed in learn to code, some examples of some maybe phrase match queries related to that keyword that would pop up are learn to code Chicago, or potentially things like learn to code near me. But in the phrase match report, it'll always include that phrase that you type in. So this is super helpful when we're trying to discover what sort of modifiers we should be using within our keyword build, and then also figuring out what sort of search volumes there are for those different phrases. Also in SEMrush, there's the related keywords report. This just provides us with keywords that are similar or maybe related to the keyword that we search. So, for example, if we use learn to code again within SEMrush, it might reveal some not so obvious keywords that users are searching as well. So it might be something like programming class might pop up, or web development course, something like that. And this list is super helpful when we're trying to figure out what sort of potentially less expensive keywords are out there that people are searching. And again, it helps us get better coverage when we're building out that keyword list. We can get better coverage on all the different variations that people are using to search for a certain product or service. And so here we just have a screenshot of the SEMrush interface, again using that same example of learn to code. We get some interesting information here, so you'll notice some organic search information, paid search information, which of course we're a little more interested in, as well as CPC distributions and trends. And again, the trend is really nice to figure out what sort of seasonality we might expect to run into for this given client. And then below that first section, that's where you'll find the phrase match keywords, as well as some of those related keywords that we discussed. And then here's a similar screenshot, however this one is from Google Keyword Planner. So again, a lot of the same information. I tend to lean towards Google Keyword Planner just because it's straight from the horse's mouth. But keep in mind that sometimes a lot of these Google Keyword Planner estimates are a bit low, and so you should expect to see some higher estimates. So here we see the keyword ideas tab. So again, using learn to code, some of the kind of related keywords would be web design, web designer, code academy, web development, learn programming. All of these are related keywords to learn to code, and these are keywords that we definitely should consider including in our keyword build because they are super relevant, and in a lot of cases some of these maybe more tangential keywords are going to be a bit less competitive, and so what we'll see with that is oftentimes cheaper CPCs. So it's important to definitely cover those longer tail, kind of more obscure searches that people are still making. And then finally, kind of after you do that research phase, both by just going to Google and typing in kind of the top keywords or core terms to figure out what sort of related searches there might be, and then also plugging those core terms into SEMrush and Google Keyword Planner, then we can start to think about what sort of terms are most important to the client. Specifically thinking of like what we call core terms. So what are their main terms that they want to target? These are the terms that are pretty much always going to be within the keywords that we create. What's their more general keyword that they want to focus on, or set of keywords that they want to focus on. And then on top of that, it's important to think of what sort of modifiers would go with those keywords. So again, the more general version might be like coding class, but then we also want to consider what sort of modifiers, for example, maybe it's an online coding class, or they offer an online option, we want to make sure we include those modifiers, so online coding course or something like that. From there, we can start to build what we call a structure document. And this really just helps organize our keyword build. And then it's also a great way for us to kind of communicate our keyword build to the client before we actually start building out all the different keywords. In this way, when we organize it this way, we're able to, again, send it to the client. They can review it, make sure nothing's missing, make sure nothing's irrelevant that maybe we should pull out. And then once they approve it, then we can go ahead and start building out the account. But basically, the structure document is just a document that contains a list of core keywords and all the different possible modifiers that might go with those core terms to create an extensive list of long tail keywords. And again, the purpose is to be able to send it to the client for their review before we actually start building out the keywords. It also helps us organize the terms in a way that makes sense, where we can use it with the PSM keyword build tool, which just helps us build out these really long tail extensive accounts, search accounts. And so the main structure here, you can see it in the screenshot in the top right, but the main structure here is using those core terms on the left, including all of the different modifiers that we want to include with those core terms. And then it's also important to include any sort of negatives that we want to make sure we're not showing up for searches for example, like a wireless home theater or a wireless soundbar in the example shown in the top right there. But then what we basically are able to do with the structure doc there is then we can start to concatenate all the different variations of those core terms and modifiers to create our long tail and our extensive keyword build. So things like in the example there, low cost soundbar, best soundbar system, where to get soundbar system, where to get inexpensive soundbar. You can start to see all of the different keywords that could be built out with that simple structure document. As mentioned earlier, it's really important to get an idea of what your competitors are doing and what the competition looks like in the given space. And so again, one of the best ways to do this is just to go to Google, type in some of your keywords, and go ahead and click on the different ads that pop up. Go to the competitors' landing pages, figure out what sort of messaging they're using, or maybe they're offering some sort of promo. This is all stuff that's really important, research that's really important to do to make sure that your client is able to stand out against the competition. Additionally, you can get an idea of what sort of keywords the competitors are targeting just by going to Google and typing in the different keywords that you come up with. Again, take a look at their ad copy, take a look at how they're messaging their product or service, or how they're advertising their product or service, and then what sort of value props does the competition offer, and then within that, think of, again, how the client can set themselves apart from the other competitors in that space. You can also use domain research on SEMRush, which is just another little section of that tool where basically you can type in any domain that you want and you can get an idea of what sort of keywords they're targeting. You can get an idea of what their ads look like. A similar tool that allows you to make a handful of free searches each day is SpyFu. So similar thing, you can go to SpyFu, type in the domain of a competitor, get an idea of what their ads look like, get an idea of what sort of keywords they're targeting. It usually also provides a projected budget for those keywords, so it'll try to take some data and predict what sort of budget that competitor is spending per month. But keep in mind that that's just a projection, it's just third-party data, so it's not always the most accurate. But at the end of the day, it is still super helpful to have some sort of idea or some sort of projection there of what the competition is spending as well. Thanks for listening to the PPC Research Phase training. Hope you learned a lot, and we'll talk to you soon.